Hey man, today you and me will build a tool that lets you go to any website on the internet, put localhost 3000 in front of it or your hosted website, right, if you deploy it somewhere, and then chat to that website. It works for Wikipedia, for anything else, it doesn't matter, and uses one of the most modern approaches to AI that I know of, because it's literally a super new package that we just released at Upstash, and I'm very excited to show it to you. But this video is not just AI, it's also patterns, conventions, just generally good ideas that I learned over the years of being a software engineer that I want to teach to you. So really, even if you're a beginner in Next.js, this is a really nice project to get started. We're going over basics in Next.js, over middleware, over dynamic routes, a lot of concepts that are really useful that you're gonna see in a ton of code bases once you progress. So dude, you're in for the full experience. Strap in. By the way, following along with this video is completely free. Right? We're gonna use Upstash on the free tier. You don't need a credit card, nothing. You can just follow along as is. So dude, let's just write some good software together. Let's get started, start writing the application, and you're gonna learn a lot, I promise. Okay, awesome dude. So let's actually get started. Let's build this entire application in hopefully less than like an hour or an hour and a half, and learn how to do it. Right? So how does this work? How do you architect conceptually and practically an app like this? And we're gonna get started on our desktop. We can close out of that and let's open up the terminal. Now, it's just my personal preference. I always like to put my new apps on the desktop. Of course, you can put this wherever you want. And let me zoom in so you can see this easier. There we go. And we're gonna say, so this depends on which package manager you want to use. I personally use Bun a lot because it's very fast, but you could use npm, right? So this would be npx create next app at latest, so the latest version of Next.js. And we can also give it a name, right? So you can call this ask this website, for example. I'm gonna name it ask this website too, because of course that project already exists for me. And I'm gonna use bunx, which is just the npm version for bun, I guess, if that makes sense. So it's just a different package manager we use to create this next app, but it really doesn't matter which one you use. And then we're gonna hit enter. Now that's gonna ask us a bunch of these default questions, like, do you want to use TypeScript? Oh yes, we do. Hell yeah. ESLint, yes, that's pretty good for code quality. Tailwind, yes. Source directory, this is very much personal preference. I like it. So I'm gonna hit yes. App router, yes. And would you like to customize the default import alias? No, I do not want to customize that. And probably you don't want to either. Awesome. Okay, so that created our next app. Let's clear the screen and then let's navigate into that. So ask this website to, or for you, depending on what you named it, ask this website. Awesome. And after that, we can say code dot in this directory, which is going to open up this current folder that we're in VS Code. Which is the IDE that I like to use. But of course, if you want to use a different one, that's totally cool. Now, really quick, I'm gonna navigate here into my user settings and hide some stuff because it tends to look pretty bad in the video. So let me hide that and that. There we go. And we're just gonna have a lot more space to work with once we reload our window. So the left sidebar is gone, for example. We can also hide the bottom bar here. That's just some of my VS Code config, and bam, all of a sudden we have a lot more, you know, like real estate on the screen to work with in this video. Awesome. Okay, so once we go into the sidebar, we can see there's the default Next.js stuff in here, right? With the app directory and the globals.css, the layout, and the page.tsx. Now, the first thing we're gonna do is to actually start this up. We're gonna say yarn dev or npm run dev. It's the exact same thing. I just tend to use yarn out of habit. And by the way, since I already have the other app running, let me pause that. That would have started on another port, but we don't want that. So let me try this again. There we go. And our app is gonna start on port 3000. Let's try that. If we navigate into our browser, and let me just move that over here, and we go to localhost 3000, let's see what happens. We see the default Next.js stuff, which is perfect, right? Get started by editing source app page.tsx and so on, which is just the default stuff that's put in here. Great, so now we know that our app is working. Awesome. We can kind of leave this over here, I guess, and give this a bit less space as well. There we go. Just move this into a kind of side-by-side and get started in our actual code. Now, where are we going to start? What's the idea here? So the idea is once we are on a page, we can just prepend localhost 3000 to it, right? So what I showed you in the beginning, if we're on any Wikipedia page, like wikipedia.org, what we want to be able to do is to just put localhost HTTP localhost 3000, and that's probably very small for you to see here. Trust me, it's gonna get a lot easier soon. And hit enter. There we go. This page could not be found, but already we can see like what the URL structure is. It's localhost, and then right away the URL that we actually want to index and ask questions about, right? So how do we get access to this URL in Next.js? That's the basic question, right? And I know this is very small for you to see, so let's just do this in code. I think it's a lot easier. So the main question being, how do we get access to the URL that we want to ask questions about in this code part in Next.js? And that's pretty easy in Next, actually. Let's create a new folder, and in angled brackets, let's name this ... URL. Now, I'm gonna get to the syntax here in just a second, why we name it exactly like this. For now, let's create a file in here, and that's gonna be a page.tsx. So a convention in Next is whatever you name the folder is gonna end up in the actual URL, and then inside of there, to define the content of the page, you use a page.tsx. It has to be named that. It has to be named page.tsx, right? And once we create a page in here, which is nothing else than a regular function that we export default at the bottom here, if we now return something from this component, like for example a p tag saying hello, and we save that, all of a sudden, check this out, http localhost 3000 / and then the actual Wikipedia URL that is still in there now produces a hello message. And let's go into a side-by-side here again. There we go. And that's not the entire solution to the riddle, right? We still don't have access to the URL yet, but we almost do, because we created this as a dynamic route, which means that dynamic stuff like the URL is now automatically passed into this page by Next.js. And let's move this into a side-by-side. There we go. So what we can do is receive something called params in this component. And these are going to be of type page props, and by the way, these params are gonna be an object. Now, where do these come from? Basically, they are automatically passed into this dynamic page by Next.js. So because we put this in angled brackets and then ... in Next.js, all that means is a catch-all route segment. So whatever comes after the localhost, so the entire Wikipedia URL, is now automatically passed into this page as a prop that we can just receive, which is awesome. So we can define an interface page props in our page, and this takes something called the params. Now, if you're wondering how I know that, that's just from the documentation. They're always named params because those are the query parameters. And as for the value that we're looking for, it's the URL right here. We can receive that as a string, oops, not strong, a string or string array, or this could also be undefined. Right? And now we can get access to these params right here in our actual page. So for example, let's just log them out. Let's console log the params right here in our page and try that again. So what we should see is in our server logs right here. Okay, dude, we can already see it. Well, we got spoiled. Okay, that was a bit too easy. But what I wanted to show you, right, is that each path right here from the Wikipedia URL is now passed as a separate element in the string array automatically into our page, right? And why is this called the URL, by the way? How do I know it's the URL? And that's because that's what we named right here in the segment. So if I rename this to something else, something else, for example, and then we try this again, let's update the imports. Right, let's save the new page and let's reload right here. Then what we're gonna see is that also the name of the prop has changed. So it actually matters what we name this dynamic segment, because that's gonna end up as the param that's passed into our page, right? So in our case, we want to name this URL because that's literally what it is, right? It's the Wikipedia URL. So once we reload this, we can see we got back our original structure with the URL and then the Wikipedia path, or basically it doesn't have to be Wikipedia, but anything that comes after the localhost 3000 will now be passed into this dynamic route as a string array, right? And that is the most important part. That is how we get the data from the website to index and to ask questions about. So how do we ask questions to this website content? And the first thing we're gonna do in order to achieve that is, clear our terminal, right? And then say bun add or npm install or yarn add. Again, the package manager does not matter. It's add upstash /rag chat, which is the package that me and my colleagues have developed to make chatting with AI extremely easy. It takes so much less code to do it in RagChat. It just works out of the box, and we're really proud of what we built. So let's start up back our development server. And by the way, to get started with RagChat, you do not even need an OpenAI key. You can use the out-of-the-box models that RagChat brings completely for free. So let's create a RagChat, right? Basically what is also a method to index data directly from a website URL to put it into our vector database. Trust me, we'll get there, right? For now, let's just create a lib folder in our source. And that's just a convention to name it lib to prepare libraries to be used in our project. And inside of here, let's create a ragchat.ts, which is going to contain the logic for the AI chat, right? And this is going to be super straightforward. We're going to export a const and name it ragchat, and that's going to be equal to a new ragchat that we can simply import from the package ragchat that we've just installed. Now, this takes, well, basically nothing, right? This would already work out of the box. What we could do is specify the model and be a bit more explicit about it and use an upstash hosted model, which are completely free. So it's like the OpenAI alternative, right? We self-host these, and we could use two different ones. And in our case, we're going to use the Llama 8 billion instruct to just get started. Awesome. And that's it, right? We can, dude, we don't even have to specify that. It would already work like this, but I think it's a bit more nice if we specify the model as well. And now in our page, we can get started to index this website data right away with RagChat, because there's a method that's called, let's say, await, RagChat. Let's import that from our lib right here that we just prepared, .context.add. And nope, we don't want emmet here. There we go. And the type of context that we want to add is gonna be HTML. Now, the source for this is gonna be the Wikipedia URL, right? So we want to go ahead, go to this Wikipedia URL and put the data that is on that page into our RagChat to chat with it, right? How do we do that? Well, first off, we kind of need to reconstruct the Wikipedia URL, because if you remember, right, let's comment this out for a second. If you remember what the Wikipedia URL looked like in our server logs, let me show you again. It's this, right? It's basically escaped, right? So there's no slash here, but it's the %3a. So basically we need to reconstruct the Wikipedia URL to be the original. Let's say const reconstructed URL is going to be equal to, and let's just call a function called reconstruct URL that we're going to define in a second here. And this should take a URL property, and that's going to be our params.url as a string array. There we go. Now all that's left to do is implement this function. That's going to be really straightforward. Let's define a function called just that, called reconstruct URL. And we already know what this takes. So this is going to be a URL. And this URL is going to be of type string array, so exactly what Next.js gives us in the actual page component, right? And what we're going to return from this function is going to be the reconstructed URL. And oops, the syntax is a bit different. There we go. So let's say const decoded components is gonna be. And now what we're gonna do is go through each element in the array and decode it, because this is an encoded URL, right? A encoded URI component, so basically escaped, and we want to unescape it. You're gonna see what this does. It's very easy, trust me. So what we're gonna do is say URL dot map, because this is a string array, remember, and for each component right here, which is not a React component, it's just a like string component, a part of the URL, right? That's what a component means here. If we hover over it, it says string right here. And we can just call the decode URI component, which is a built-in JavaScript function on that component, which is basically gonna turn this stuff right here. If we try that out in the browser, let me show you. If we go to inspect, by the way, you don't have to follow along. Let me just show you. If we put this in here and then call the decode URI component on it. Okay, well, I put it into double quotes. There we go. Wait. So let me remove these right here. There we are. And oh, that wasn't a slash. It was a colon. That means, oh, I can't zoom in. Ah, there we go. So it took the original and it put it back into what we expect a URL to look like, right? With the colon right here. That's the important thing, right? So let's close out of this again. Let's move that to the side. We don't need that right now, just to show you what this does. And now all we can do is simply return the decoded components, and we're going to join them together using a slash, right? Because that's the delimiter. That's how we separate the URL. Perfect. And what we get back from this function is literally the entire original URL that we got from Wikipedia that we can now use as the source for our Rack chat. So this is going to be the actual Wikipedia URL. So we're telling the Rack chat to, hey, go ahead, go to that website, take the data and put it in your storage. And by the way, in order to use the await keyword right here, we can mark this as a synchronous component because it is a server component by default in Next.js. And if you want, you can also specify a config here. Oops, there we go. For example, with the chunk overlap, this is how we kind of take the data. We can specify that, right? We can say the chunk overlap should be 50 characters and the chunk size, so each piece of data that we extract from Wikipedia is going to be approximately 200 characters. You don't have to do that. There are good defaults, but I think this works really nice for this use case. And that's basically it. Once we execute this, all the data for this Wikipedia page is going to be in our database. Now the question is, which database? We don't have a database yet. And what we are gonna do is go ahead to upstash. So this is under upstash.com right here, which is where I work, right? This is how it's possible for me to do these videos. And we're gonna use the vector storage from Upstash as a database. So let's log in. By the way, as I probably mentioned in the beginning of the video, this is completely free. Right? Upstash has a super generous free tier. It will cost you absolutely nothing to follow along with this video. No credit card needed, nothing. It's very, very easy to follow along. Now, as the vector name, so this is a vector database, let's say ask this website to, because as you can see, literally the entire project already exists. You can just name it Ask This Website. I'm going to host it in Ireland because that's closer to me than the US is. As the embedding model, you don't have to choose one, but it is really nice to choose one. So I recommend you do it. So in our case, it kind of depends. Do we want a better model that's a bit slower? Do we want a faster model that's a bit worse? I'm going to go with large because even though it's a bit slower, it's a really, really good model. With 1024 dimensions, and we're gonna hit next, and then we can go for the pay-as-you-go because I have a credit card like in my account, but you can just go with a free plan, right? You don't have to pay anything, so that's gonna show up for you. And once our index is configured, which might take a bit, I'm gonna skip that. By the way, I'm gonna be right back. Once that's done, we can actually put the data in our database and start asking Wikipedia some stuff, right? So oh, I don't even need to cut, dude. All right, awesome. So it's already done. Perfect. So what we're gonna do is go to the .env I'm gonna enable this, grab these env values, and we can simply go ahead and paste them in our project, right? So let's move this to the side. Let's create a new file at the very root of our project called .env, which contains like sensitive environment variables that we don't want to leak to anyone. They are very, very important. And just paste the vector stuff in here. And that's literally it. Right? Once we save our page and go to any Wikipedia page, we're going to see that data for that Wikipedia page is now automatically put into our vector database. So let's try that, right? Let's go to Wikipedia random to any Wikipedia page right here and click on that. Okay, so this is from Tom Hartley, who is a politician. Let's just go to our URL and put HTTP localhost 3000 in front of it and hit enter. Oh wow, dude. Okay. Yeah, okay. Wow, so one thing I forgot to tell you is we also need the upstash token. Again, it's completely free. I just forgot to do it. So we're gonna go back to upstash. So the reason we get this error is because the RAG chat right here, this model expects an API key. Again, it's free, right? We just forgot to do it. And we can get this key right here under upstash, right here at the very top, upstash, and go ahead and copy our upstash token. So let me zoom in a bit so it's easier for you to see. It's right here, upstash token. Just copy that, paste it in your .env and also name it upstash underscore token is equal to that part right here. And then we can close out of our env and try again, right? So, okay, this seemed to have already worked, right? So the website automatically reloaded. Now what we expect to happen is to now see this Wikipedia data in our vector database, right? So let's try seeing that. Let's go to our vector, ask this website 2 that we just created, and bam, there we are. It has 145 vectors inside of it. That is really nice. And as you can see, it's the data from Wikipedia. Now there's some more irrelevant stuff right here that it crawled from the website, which are not gonna be relevant for data retrieval, but a lot right here, the English cricketer, see Tom Hardy. So apparently that guy is a cricketer, etc. A lot of stuff. So it basically took all the content from the website and put it in your vector database automatically. Right? And we can already chat with that. We don't have a chat interface yet, but the data is already in our website, which is really, really nice. Now, one thing that we really want to avoid is if I reload this page right now, it's gonna do the same command again and put the data in our database again, right? So we're gonna have 300 vectors of the same data, right? Which is going to be pretty bad. So one thing we want to do, again, this is optional, but I very much recommend it, is keeping track of which websites you have indexed in some kind of way. The easiest way for this is with upstash Redis, but you could use any kind of database. You could even do it in memory, hard-coded, whatever you want. Just make sure to not execute this command every time if we already indexed the data, right? That's a bit redundant. So if you want to follow along with me with Redis, go ahead right now. If you want to do it any other way, that's totally cool. In our case, I'm gonna name this Redis website this Redis database, ask this website 2. As the region, I'm gonna choose Frankfurt, and we're gonna hit next. That's automatically gonna create our database. Again, this is totally free. You can be on the free plan. This costs you nothing. Beautiful. And once that's done, we can install bun install at upstash/redis into our app, which is gonna make it really easy to keep track of what we have already put into our vector store and what we haven't. To set up Redis, it's really easy. We can go down right here to the REST API section and simply copy or Redis REST URL and the REST token and paste those into our .env file as well. Let's kind of visually separate them so it's easier to see for us. And that's basically it. Just like with the RAG chat, we're gonna create one more file in our lib, so the library folder called redis.ts. And all we're gonna do here is say export const redis is gonna be equal to a new Redis, which we get from upstash Redis dot from env. And all that means is and that's not gonna be a new Redis, just a Redis dot from env. That's automatically gonna go ahead, take the values that we just put into our env file and create a Redis instance with it. Super, super easy. right? And once we've done that, we can simply check right here in our code if the data is already indexed before we index it. So in our case, what we're gonna do is say const is already indexed is gonna be equal to await redis.s is member, and let's import redis. So this is a set command that we can execute. A set is basically a list of unique values, and we're checking, is this current URL, is the reconstructed URL a member in the set called indexed URLs. Now you can call this whatever you want. I just think this name makes a lot of sense. So this is what we name our set of stuff that we have already indexed. And now to check what is a member, we're gonna check if the reconstructed URL right here is a member in that set. And if it is, then we don't want to re-index this information, right? So I'm gonna cut this out using Control X for a second and put this in an if statement. So if not is already indexed, only in that case, and paste that back, do we actually want to add something to our vector store, right? And if it is already indexed, this specific URL, well, then we don't want to do it again, right? And very important, of course, after adding it, we also need to tell Redis, hey, now we added it. So next time we try, this check is successful. So we're gonna say await redis.sadd. So we're adding to a set, so set add. And in here, we're gonna add to the indexed URL set, just like we're checking up here. And the stuff we want to put in there, you can probably guess it's the reconstructed URL. And after we save that, let's try if this works. Let's navigate over to our vector store and delete everything that's inside of it to try this again. So we can go into our data browser, delete all records, oops, delete. There we go, we can hit confirm. By the way, it's this trash icon right here, and that's gonna delete the entire data that's in our vector store. So now we have 0 vectors in here again. If we reload our page, oh, and of course start back up our development server, wow. Once that's done and we reload our page, it should re-index all the information into our vector store. Beautiful, so let's try if that worked. Let's reload, refresh, and we should see, there we are, 145 vectors in here again. However, if we now reload again, we should see, and we can log something out here. Let's say console log is already indexed, and log the is already indexed value right here. If we reload our page, we get a 1, which is a success value, right? So this is already indexed in our case. So if we reload our vector store, of course, we're gonna see it's not gonna put the data in there again. That's because if we look into a Redis database, right, we can see all indexed URLs in here, and that is literally the Wikipedia page we are on. So if we navigate it to a different Wikipedia page, then it's gonna index because it's not in there yet, but the current one, we don't need to do it again. Beautiful, man. And the last thing we're gonna do in here is implement some sessions. Now that's really, really easy. Let's just mock this for now and worry about it later. We're just gonna say const session ID is gonna be equal to mock session, right? We're gonna implement this later. It's very simple to implement, but I want to get to the actual chat functionality with you. Awesome. And once that's done, we can simply return our chat wrapper and get started on the actual chat UI, because right now we just have a page that says hello, which is pretty bad, right? And we're gonna create a component called the chat wrapper, which doesn't exist yet. So we're gonna create it, and we're gonna do that in our source and create a new folder called components, which is just a convention, again, that I like to follow. Technically, you can put these wherever the hell you want. And inside of this components, we're gonna create a new file called chatwrapper.tsx. And inside of this chat wrapper, let's define a React component. Const chat wrapper is gonna be equal to an arrow function, and we can also go ahead and export that chat wrapper from this component. And this chat wrapper is gonna be one of the coolest components because it houses two things. First off, the entire message history, and then secondly, the input for the chat, right? So it's basically everything that you need for a working chat, and it's all gonna live inside of this chat wrapper component. Now, first things first, let's mark this as a client component, right? Because In Next.js by default, this would be a server-side component, and we don't want that because we're gonna make use of a client-side hook. And that hook is not a built-in React one, but it is coming from bun install, and that's AI. Like literally, that's the name. It's the Vercel AI SDK. Now let me show you what that is. Because the thing is, at first I did not even want to include this, but turns out people really like the Vercel AI SDK. So I was like, okay, sure, then let's integrate it. And you can see right here, wow, it got a lot of downloads. Then it kind of dropped. I wonder what happened here. Interesting. And now it's getting more traction. Again, like 300,000 downloads. Yeah, people kind of like the Vercel AI SDK. So I thought, okay, sure, you can use RagChat completely without it. But why not? If people like it so much, we can integrate it, no problem. Because we also have an adapter for RagChat to the Vercel AI SDK to make the integration like super easy. Now we can destructure something from the use chat hook, and by the way, we didn't hit enter, so let's hit enter. That's gonna install the AI SDK into our app, and then we can import the, let's reload our window, import the use chat hook. And dude, okay, the auto imports don't seem to be working. Use chat from, and that's AI/React. And there we go. If we manually import it, that works. Now, this use chat takes two things. First thing, that's the API. Well, we can pass a lot of stuff in here, to be honest, but the only thing we care about for now is the API. And that's gonna be /API/chat stream. So basically, this is an API route in your own project that determines how the Vercel AI SDK gets the messages for the chat, right? And we're gonna configure that ourselves, and it's gonna live under this path right here. That's how we know what to put there. And as the body, we want to include the session ID, because the thing is, we need some kind of session functionality in our app. If I'm chatting to Wikipedia page X and you're chatting to Wikipedia page Y, of course, we don't want to share the same chat. We don't want to share the same data and so on, right? A chat should always be specific to one Wikipedia page and to one user. More importantly, right? Very important. And in order to ensure that, we're gonna pass in the session ID that we've already created, or mocked, should I say, in here, into the chat wrapper. And the session ID is gonna be of type string. And all we can now do is also include that session ID in our request to this API route. And you're gonna see how we use that in the RagChat. It's very simple to ensure kind of session functionality in our app. Awesome. And then from here, we're going to return at the top level a div. And this one is going to get a class name of relative, a minimum height of full to take up the entire screen, a background zinc of 900, flex, a divide-y, a divide zinc of 700, a flex-col, a justify between, there we go, and a gap of 2. Perfect. Now, inside of here, one more div, one last div, and that's gonna get a class name of flex1 to take up as much space as it possibly can, a text of black, a bg zinc of 800, justify between, once again, flex and flex-col. Now, inside of this div, we're gonna render out the messages. We're gonna put them in a custom component to make them look good. But first off, let's just render them out as they are. Let's grab the messages from use chat. We can just destructure that. Really simple with the Vercel AI SDK. And let's just say json.stringify messages here. That's what I like to do personally. Just put the stuff here, worry about it looking good later, just so we can make sure it works. And let's also put an input component right down here. Now this input receives two things. First thing is going to be the handle input change that we can also destructure from the AI SDK, right? And that's basically just an abstraction that handles some of the keeping track of messages for us, which is really convenient. So the input is gonna get an onChange handler, and that's gonna be the handle input change. And also it's gonna get the value, so that we can also destructure from the use chat hook, right? So the value of the input is gonna be the input to make this a controlled input, right? So the value changes are propagated to the function, and then in turn we get it back, which is basically, dude, this is basically same thing as state, right? If we have like input, set input is equal to use state, imagine that, right? And we have a string in here, and you don't need to follow along, by the way, I just want to show you that. And if we now set the input to the e.target.value, then bam, we have the same effect, right? It's a controlled input, this exact same way as the AI SDK does it, but the AI SDK also takes care of stuff like the messages for us, which is just added convenience, right? But just so you know, under the hood, this is really just state, nothing else. Awesome. So let's save the chat wrapper. Let's also pass in, well, first let's import it in our main page, and then let's pass in the session ID that we mocked right up here. It's just the mock session for now, and pass the session ID in there and save. Awesome. So is our dev server running? No, it's not. Let's start that up. And once it is, we should be able to see that we now have a input right here. Perfect. And the messages as an array. That's great. Right? The only thing we don't currently have is the actual API route that implements the chat functionality. And dude, honestly, nothing easier than that with RagChat, with the SDK that we developed, right? So let's create this API route to handle the chat. That's gonna live under app. Let's create a new folder in our app folder called API. Right? And in here, one more folder, and that folder is going to be named chat-stream or -stream, and in here a new route.ts file. So as per Next.js convention, this will end up in the URL name. The folder names are going to be actually visible in the URL. The route.ts is a convention to define the content of the API. It won't end up in the URL. So this API would be localhost 3000/API/chatstream. That's it, right? And then the logic goes in the route file. It doesn't end up in the URL, right? Perfect. Okay, so from here, let's export a const, and we need to export the HTTP verb that we want to respond to, right? So in our case, that's going to be post. It's going to be an asynchronous arrow function. And similarly, if you wanted to respond to the HTTP delete method, bam, right? That's how the Next.js convention works. That's how you define API routes. And in here, we get access to the request, just like so, which is of type request, or next request, which is a kind of not next response, next request. There we go, which is a Next.js type. Both works, right? The request is a standard built-in one. You could also type this in TypeScript as the next request. Both work. It really does not matter. And then we can destructure two things from the body, right? So that's going to be the await rec.json. That's how we get access to the post request body in Next.js. And we can destructure two things from there, the messages and the session ID. There we go. Perfect. Now, because these messages are a few user messages, right? It's the plural. We only care about the last message because we want an answer to that last message from our RagChat, right? From the AI. So we only care about the last message. Let's grab it. Let's say const last message is going to be equal to messages at the index of messages.length -1. So the last message dot content, because that's going to be the text content of the message. And then let's get the response from our AI. Const response is going to be equal to await ragchat.chat. And in here, we're going to pass the last message as, message as the input. And that's it, right? We could already, dude, honestly, let's just try this. Before we even complete the more advanced implementation, let me just show you that this works. Let's log out the response right here in our API. And let's just try this out. Let's just keep this open, give it a bit more space, and let's ask something along the line. Oh, by the way, even if we typed something in here, I don't think we have a submit functionality in here. No, we don't. Okay, so one thing we still need to do is to wrap the input in a form so that when we submit it, we can actually call our API. So let's wrap this input inside of a form. We can completely get rid of the action on the form. We don't care about that. The only thing we care about is the on submit on that form. And conveniently, the AI SDK also provides something called the handle submit. Handle submit, and sometimes Emmet really messes up here. There we go, that we can simply destructure from the Vercel AI SDK up here and pass into the form as the onSubmit handler. all that's gonna do under the hood is take the value of the input, whatever we wrote in here as the like question. And by the way, the text is white, so we can't see it. Let's add a text black. You don't have to follow along. Trust me, we're gonna make this much prettier, as you saw in the intro, just so we can see what the hell we're typing here. And then let's also add a button that says send of type submit, to submit that form, right? So we have our very, very basic input, I know, and then a button to send that message. Now, what we expect to happen is for our content of the input to be sent to this API route right here, done by the Vercel AI SDK, and then to actually get a response from the AI based on our data, right? So let's try that. We should see a response log in our server log. Let's open that. And let's ask a question. By the way, what was the Wikipedia page that we even indexed? I forgot. Like, we want to ask a question about the page probably. Oh, it was the politician. Okay, let's copy the name and let's just ask who was, and then paste in the name whatever our Wikipedia page was about, or whatever yours is about as you're following along. Let's hit send. Let's try that. Oh, and we got, what did we get? Okay, response. According to the context, Tom Hartley is a historian and Irish Republican politician born. Perfect. Very, very nice. And then we get an error. No response is returned from route handler as expected, right? So the problem here is we're not returning a response here. And that's totally expected. That's fine. I just wanted to show you the response from the Rack chat. As easy as that. We built a working chatbot. Right? Because this Rack chat already has all our data, we can just ask it. As easy as that. Now to improve this, right? Does this work? Yes. Is it perfect? No. Let's make it so. So one thing we can do, or we should do, is probably pass in the session ID into our Rack chat, because we want this to be user and Wikipedia page specific, right? Otherwise this would be a complete mess. And the second thing we can do is put streaming to true, which is a really cool feature supported out of the box in Rack chat to stream in the AI response as we get it, right? And we can simply return that to the front end, by using the AI use chat adapter that we also provide in the Rack chat SDK out of the box. So that comes from import AI use chat adapter, which is specifically for the Vercel AI SDK, by the way, from at upstash/rackchat/Next.js. So this is an adapter we specifically wrote for Next.js, and we can simply pass in the response. And all that's gonna do is take the stream, which is of type readable stream, right here, the output, and stream it to the client side using this adapter, right? So essentially, we're gonna have it streamed in to our front end, and we can show the message as it's generated by the AI, right? So let's try this again. Who was, not response, what was the guy's name? Tom Hartley, and hit send. Let's see what happens. Bam, did you see that? This was just streamed in. If you want, you can skip back like 5 seconds. Streamed in real time as the AI generated the answer, just like that, to a front end. It does not get easier than this, right? I'm very proud of what we built with Rack chat, as you can probably tell, and I really hope you enjoyed that too. And that's basically the chat functionality implemented, man. Now, I know this looks absolutely horrendous, but the core idea is there and it works, which is really nice. And now it's about making this look not horrendous, right? So instead of rendering the messages like this as JSON.stringify, let's turn this into an actual messages component that we can simply pass the messages as a prop, right? Of course, this component doesn't exist yet, so let's create it. Let's go in our components, create a messages.tsx file, and in here, we're gonna export a const messages. This is gonna be nothing else than a regular React arrow function component. Now let's receive the messages as a prop in this component. Let's type them as the messages props right here and define that interface. So the interface messages props is gonna be containing the messages property, of course, and that's gonna be of type tMessage array. Awesome. And that tMessage, which is like a TypeScript convention to call it T for type message, will come from import message as tMessage from AI/React. And by the way, pro tip, you can also just import the type by annotating type in the import statement if you just care about the TypeScript definition, by the way, if you didn't know that. Very, very convenient because you avoid importing the actual thing to save bundle size, which is very nice. Now, why do we call it tMessage? Because else it's going to conflict with a component that we're going to use here in a second, but we're going to get there. First off, let's return from the messages component. What are we going to return? A div at the top level with a class name of flex, a maximum height of in angled brackets for a custom value, calc, so we're going to calculate the height dynamically, 100 VH, view height, minus 3.5 rem, minus 7 rem. And that's basically the offset for the chat interface at the very bottom. So this is going to contain all our messages up here and leave some space for the chat interface at the very bottom. That's what we're doing here. Let's give this a flex of 1, a flex dash call, and lastly an overflow y of auto to enable scrolling. Perfect. Now, if we have messages, if there are any, then in that case, we're going to map over them. Then we're going to say messages.map. And for each message, we're going to return some JSX. We're going to worry about that here in a second. And let's also handle the other case. If we do not have messages, in that case, we're going to return a div at the top level, just like so. Let's worry about that later as well. First, let's do the messages. So what do we render for each message? And let's just create a custom message component. And this is the exact reason we named the type tMessage, so it doesn't conflict naming wise with our custom message component that we're going to put in here. Now, because we're mapping, we also need a key on this component right here. And as the key, we can just use the index that we're mapping over that we always get access to right here as the second argument in the map. And then the content of that message is going to be the message.content. And lastly, is this a user message? Is user message. We need to know that to render out the message differently for AI versus human is going to be equal to message.role is triple equal to user. There we go. Now, of course, this custom component doesn't exist yet. So let's create it also under components, message.tsx. Let's export a const message is nothing else, once again, than a regular arrow function. And let's just return a div in here for now, just so we can already go ahead and import this custom component. Now we're still gonna get the error that it doesn't take these props. We're gonna fix that. But now we can already also import the messages component in our chat wrapper and just already get rid of a bunch of errors that we get. Now, to fix this error right here, we actually need to receive the props in the message component. Nothing easier than that. Let's kind of clean this up and receive those components, which are both the content and the isUser message. And let's type this as message props. Now, once again, let's define an interface message props. And in here is going to be the content of type string, and the isUser message, as you can probably guess, is going to be of type Boolean. Did the AI write this or did the user write this? And just like that, bam, we got rid of all errors, and we also got rid of the message history here, but that's what we're implementing right now. So dude, let's make this actually look good. And the first thing we're gonna do is a conditional class name on this top level div. And there's a lot of approaches to do conditional class names with Tailwind. The one we're gonna take that I use in almost all of my apps, that's by far the most convenient, I think, is inside of a utils folder that we're gonna create in our lib, a utils file in our lib folder that way. And we're gonna make use of two packages in here. And that's gonna be bun install. First thing, tailwind-merge, which makes class merging really intuitive, because by default in Tailwind it's not. It depends on CSS order by default, which we do not want. That's what Tailwind merge is for. And CLSX, which stands for like class name X or something. I don't know. But anyways, we can now export a, let's just say function, it doesn't really matter. Function CN, which stands for class names, which takes a bunch of inputs, so ... inputs, and these are going to be of type class value array. And by the way, this class value is a type. We can simply import type class value, from CLSX, that package we just installed. And now to complete our function, we can simply return twmerge, which is another function we get from import tailwind merge. Oops, not marge. We're not at Simpsons, but merge from tailwind merge. There we go. And in here, we can simply pass the CLSX, which is a function we can import, and pass the inputs in here. Okay, not the most intuitive, I agree. But basically what it does, dude, let me just show you. I mean, chances are you have used this before, but if you didn't, let me show you what, oh, whoa, what did I do? But chances are, if you haven't, let me just show you what this does. It's really, really easy to use. We can just call our CN helper function in here to dynamically apply class names. For example, let's apply a background zinc of 800. There we go. If this is a user message, and let's apply a background zinc of 900/25 for opacity 25. If this is not a user message, just like that. You see this syntax? This is beautiful. If you didn't have the CN helper function, you could achieve the same thing in plain React, but it would be a lot more verbose, and I much prefer the CN approach. In here, we're gonna create a div with a class name of padding of 6. There we go. Let's open this up. In here, one more div with a class name of maximum width 3XL, an MX of auto, flex items dash start, and a gap of 2.5. Perfect. Let's open this up. One more div. This one with a class name that's going to be dynamic once again. So we're going to use our CN helper function. First things first, the default class name, the unconditional class name that's always applied, is going to be a size of 10, which is, by the way, just width and height at the same time, if you didn't know. A shrink of 0, an aspect square, there we go, rounded off full, border zinc of 700, a BG zinc of 900, flex justify dash center, and items dash center as well. Now inside of this div, let's open this up. But before we get to the content of the div, let's also apply the conditional class name. And the way we do that just works the same way as before. We can append an object right here, pass it as the second argument into the function, besides the default class name that's always applied. And now conditionally apply a BG blue of 950, border blue of 700, and a text zinc of 200 under the condition that this is a user message, right? So we're displaying user messages differently than AI messages. And to make this a lot more better looking without much effort, let's also install an icon library. And that's going to be bun.i Lucid-React, which is a super nice React icon library. It's very minimal, but it has good looking icons. By the way, we can start back up our development server and we can grab those icons right in here. So if this is a user message, in that case, we want to render out a user icon from Lucid-React that we can import at the very top. Import user from Lucid-React. There we go. That's it. Right here, it's going to be a self-closing icon component with a class name of size 5. And if this is not a user, in that case, we're going to render out the bot icon from Lucid-React as well. And that's going to get a class name of size 5 and a text of white to make the icon white. Perfect. Let's save that and see how that looks. So let's actually send a chat message here. Hello. Wait, let me reload. Hello, how are you? And hit send. Perfect. There are our icons. There is no message yet, but the icons are there. This is my message or your message if you're following along. And this is the website that's answering us. Now let's also display the message, right? We don't just want the icon, we also want the text content to show. And that's going to happen in another div right here with 3 closing divs to go. That's where we're going to create it right here. And this is going to get a class name of flex-col, a margin left of 6, and lastly a width of full. Let's open this up. Inside of here, one more div with a class name of flex, items center, and space x of 2. Let's open this up, and inside of here a span element. And this span is going to be a conditional in terms of content, what it's going to contain. And we're going to check if this is a user message. In that case, we're going to say you, and in the other case, we're going to say website. And once we save that, you can see you website along with the icons. Beautiful. And this span is going to get a class name of text small, a font semi-bold, a text gray of 900, and on dark devices, a text of white. And once we save that, you can see it turns white. Oops, you and the website. There we go. Beautiful. Okay. Now, below this span, below the closing div after the span, let's create a p tag. So with 4 closing divs to go. And this p tag is going to contain the content of the message. And it's going to get a class name of text small, a font dash normal, padding y of 2.5, and a text white as well, but only on dark devices. And then by default, we're going to apply a text gray of 900 and hit save. Beautiful. And there we go. Now we also display the actual message content. It's you, hello, how are you? And the website responding, hello, as a friendly AI assistant, I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. Beautiful. Now, 2 things. First off, once we refresh this website, our messages are gone, right? Because right now they're only being kept in memory by default. So it just means in your PC's RAM, basically, and they're gone once we reload the website. We're gonna fix that very easily. It takes like 1 or 2 minutes, and then we're gonna store the messages in an actual database. Don't you worry. Before we do that, let's go ahead into our messages and handle the case where there are no messages, like now, right? This looks horrible. There is no indication of anything, right? So let's go to the div we already created as a placeholder here in our messages component, right here, components messages. That's where we are. And this div is gonna get a class name of flex1, flex dash call, items dash center, justify center, and a gap of 2. And inside of here, we're going to render out 3 things. The first one is the message square, which is an icon from Lucid React or icon library. And this is going to get a class name of size 8 and a text blue of 500. Now below that, we're going to render out an h3 element saying you're all set. There we go. And this h3 is going to get a class name of font semi-bold and a text of XL for extra large. And lastly, a regular paragraph, a p tag saying ask your first question to get started. Beautiful. And this p tag is gonna get a class name of text zinc 500 and a text of small. And once we save that, you're gonna see what happens here. Let's reload the page, and we should be able to see that nothing happens. Wow. Okay, so what happens if you do a check for messages.length? There we are. Okay, you're all set. Ask your first question to get started. That's much better. And okay, so 2 things. I'm zoomed in a lot, so this looks a bit weird. Secondly, this needs to be white, the heading. Otherwise, that looks really bad. There we go. Okay, that looks much nicer. You're all set. Ask your first question to get started. Beautiful. So now we're actually indicating to users like, hey, you can chat with this AI. Now, one thing I also dislike is this doesn't look good. Like it's kind of pinned to the top, right? It doesn't take up a lot of space. And then there's the message sending component like right below it and not at the bottom of the screen. That doesn't look very good, but luckily there's an easy fix for that. Let's navigate into our root layout that is automatically created by Next.js for us. It's right here. And to the body, we're gonna give a class name. And that, this already has a class name. There we go. This class name is going to use our CN helper function to combine class names. So first off, it's going to be the inter.className, which is our font, right? So we're going to stay with the same font, but then we're going to add a minimum height of screen and an anti-aliased, which is a font smoothing to make our fonts look nicer. And once we save that, you can see the font kind of changed. It looks nicer now. It's kind of smoothed out. And the second thing we can now do is create a main tag in our body. So let's cut out the children. We're going to paste them back here in a second, but let's first create a main tag for the content. This one is going to get a class name of height screen, dark, a text foreground, and a BG background, which are CSS variables that we're about to initialize. And we can paste back in the children right here. Now, once we save that, you can see, wow, this already looks much better, right? We're now pushing the input to the bottom of the screen. Awesome. The thing is, these don't exist currently, the text foreground and the BG background. And for that, I like to use a UI library that makes this look good out of the box, which is npx shadcn-ui at the latest init. So we're not actually going to use any component of the UI library. We're just going to use the default style system that it puts into our app. So for the default style, we're going to stay with the default with zinc as our color. And yes, we want to use CSS variables for colors. And just like that, it implemented these variables into our app. We can verify that in our globals.css. We can see it put some stuff into our CSS file. Same thing for the Tailwind config. It just configures some default stuff to look great out of the box, and we don't depend on any component that this UI library provides to us. We don't really care about those, right? It just makes this stuff look better out of the box. So let's start back up our development server. And the last thing we want to do is to make the input look actually good, create sessions, and then also store messages in a database, right? So 3 steps. First thing is gonna be, let's cut out the main tag of our layout and wrap it in something called the providers. Now these providers are nothing else than a custom React component we didn't create yet, but we need to create one. Let's create them, the providers.tsx. And this is a really important component that you'll find in almost any Next.js 13, 14, 15 app. Because the thing is, these providers, let's create them with use client at the very top, and export const providers is nothing else than a regular arrow function. These providers are the context providers in Next.js, and it's common convention to put them into a component called providers. Now, they take something called children, which are React nodes, and we can type them as props with children, which is a React type that automatically types children, which is just really convenient. And we're gonna return from here or children, but we're gonna wrap these children with all the context providers that our app needs. In our case, that's just gonna be one context provider from a UI library that we're gonna use to make the input look really good. That is called Next.UI. And this is not sponsored or anything. I don't even think you can be sponsored by a UI library. Just a really nice looking UI library that is meant for Next.js that looks great out of the box, as you can see right here. And that's what we're gonna use for our input. And to make that work, we need to wrap our app in something called the Next.UI provider, and also get the closing tag, wrap our children with that, and then import that Next.UI provider from at next, what is it? Next.UI-org/React, which is basically their npm package that we can install to use their UI library. So let's paste that in. Bun I or npm install yarn add, doesn't matter, add next.ui-org/React. That's gonna install the UI component. There we go. And then we can restart our development server and wrap our entire app in that UI provider by wrapping it in this providers component that contains all the client-side providers, right? So if you had any more, they would just all go in this component. We don't have any more, but as easy as that. That's why it's a convention, because it's very, very convenient and it just works. And what that does, right, is basically we're following the installation guide of this Next.UI library. We can see that right here under guide. There's some stuff that we need to do, how we can add components and so on. Well, I just walked you through it, how to do it. It's basically as easy as that. The last thing we need to do is to modify some things in our Tailwind config. Very easy changes, right? We need to change the content to contain the UI library path. So if you want to copy and paste this, just go to Next.UI installation, right? It's under docs guide installation. It's right here. You can just copy and paste the Tailwind stuff from here. Basically, we're just telling Tailwind to also apply to the UI library, which by default it doesn't. And Next.UI also provides us a plugin that we can use together with Tailwind CSS to make stuff look great out of the box, that we can simply put right here as Next.UI into the plugins array that Tailwind provides to us by default, right? And bam, as easy as that. They also tell us to wrap our app in the Next.UI provider. Well, we already did that. We're all good to go to make this app look that much better with a UI library. And we're gonna apply that right here to our input. So let's go into our chat wrapper and let's replace the super ugly form with our custom chat input component that we're about to create. So let's open our sidebar. One more file, that's gonna be our chat input.tsx. There we go. And once again, use client to make this a client-side component. We're gonna need some React hooks in here. And then export const chat input is gonna be nothing else than a super standard arrow function. Beautiful, and we can now use our UI library in here. Now, let's create a div at the top level. We also need to return that div, by the way, with a class name of z10, a bgsync of 900, absolute, a bottom of 0, a left of 0, and a width of full. Let's open this up. Inside of here, one more div with a class name of mx2, a margin x of 2, a flex, flex-row, gap 3, medium mx4. There we go. On medium last mb6, so to the last element, we're applying a margin bottom of 6, which is 1.5 rem. There we go. On large devices, an mx of auto. On large devices, a maximum width of 2xl. And on extra large devices, a maximum width of 3xl, so a bit wider. Inside of here, one more div with a class name of relative, flex, a height of full, a flex-1, an items-stretch, and lastly on medium devices, a flex-call. And lastly, one last div, I promise, let's create it with a class name of relative, flex, flex-call with full, there we go, flex-grow, and a padding of 4. And that should be flex-grow, not row. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so we have a flex-grow and a padding of 4. And inside of here goes our form. Basically what we had before, but now it's gonna look a lot better with a class name of relative. Inside of that form, let's create a text area. That text area comes from our UI library. Perfect. It's gonna be self-closing and takes a bunch of props, like a minimum amount of rows. Let's set that to 4. Let's also give this an auto focus, so the focus is automatically gonna be in this input field once the page loads, which is awesome. As the placeholder, we're gonna say enter your question, ... There we go. And as the class name, we're gonna say resize-none, a background sync of 800, a hover bgsync of 900, a rounded-XL for extra large, and a text of base for the font size. Beautiful. And right below this text area, we're gonna place a button, which is also gonna come from our UI library. And this button will get a size of small, a type of submit, because we wanted to submit the form, a class name of absolute z10 border, border-border, which is just a CSS variable, right? It sounds weird, but yes, this actually does something. Then we're gonna apply a bgsync of 900, a right of 2, and a bottom of 2 to kind of place it in the right bottom of the input area. And lastly, inside of this button, a send icon that we get from Lucid React. This can be self-closing with a class name of size 4. Bam, let's save our chat input, import it into our chat wrapper, and let's see what we just created. So is our dev server running? Yes, it is. So let's reload our page and we should be able to see that this looks a lot better. And we can see Arc is currently loading. So let's let it load. And once that's done, there we go. Wow, that's a big difference. This does look a lot better. And you can notice once we reload the page, our focus is automatically in the text area, so we can start typing right away. Beautiful, man. Very, very nice. Now to make this work together with the Vercel AI SDK, to integrate it, we need to accept a couple of props in our chat input. These props, let's type them as our chat input props and define the interface. As always, right above our component, chat input props. Now, this takes 4 things. The input is going to be a string. Then the handle input change, which is nothing else than this function right here that we're going to pass in as a prop. The question is, how do we get the type of this? Sure, we can just hover over this, copy the type and paste it in the other component, but there's actually a much cleaner approach to do that I want to show you. And that is as follows. First off, we can import the type useChat from AI/React. So we're just importing the type signature of the React hook, not the actual hook, right? Not the actual hook, just the type signature. The other one would also work, but it just adds to our bundle size, which we don't want. And for the handle input change, to get the type, let's create the type right above our interface. Type handle input change is gonna be equal to the return type, and that takes a generic type of use chat, and then add the index of handle input change. So basically what we're telling TypeScript is take whatever use chat returns, add this index right here, so add this function signature, and give us whatever that returns. And that's going to be the exact type that we get from hovering over here. You see that? And if we hover over this, same thing, but we got it in a much cleaner way. And can just type our handle input change function just like so. And then the handle submit is going to be the exact same thing. Let's call it handle submit. And the type handle submit is going to be the return type, takes a generic type of use chat, add the index of handle submit. Bam, just like that. And same thing for the set input. That's going to be of type set input. And honestly, we can just press Shift Alt arrow down on the handle submit, rename it to, let's say, set input. And then of course use the set input as the type signature that we want to type this as. And just like that, we have access to all 4 props with full type safety in a really, really clean kind of way. And dude, I just wanted to show you that. I think it's really awesome. So we can now destructure all the props that we want in our component, the handle input change, handle submit, input, and set input, and actually implement them. So first things first, the form is going to get the submit handler it had before in the other component. Remember, it's going to be the handle submit. So that's going to make the request to our API endpoint for the AI to answer. The text area is going to get an on change handler of handle input change, and also to make it controlled, a value of input. And then a nice utility we can add on the text area to make this compatible with the enter key, once you press that, is an on key down handler. And we get access to the key that was pressed in the callback function as the E, as the event, right? It's a keyboard event. And we can check if the E.key, the key that was pressed in the text area, is enter, and we are not pressing an E.shift key, so not shift enter for a new line. In that case, we don't want to send the message. We want to go into a new line. But if it's just enter, then we want to send the message. So in that case, we're going to do 3 things. First off, E.prevent default. We're not going to let the enter through, because that's going to look really weird if we did. Then we're going to handle submit. So we're going to send the message after pressing enter. And lastly, we're going to reset the input to an empty string to reset the field, ready for the user to type in their next message after pressing enter. Beautiful. And that's just nice for accessibility, for user expectation. I want to show you how to do that, because in most real world apps, you're going to have something like this with a enter key, that submits a message and similar. And all that's left to do is to now pass the props into our chat input component. So the input is going to be our input. The handle input change is going to be our handle input change. Very simple, right? The handle submit is going to be our handle submit. And lastly, the set input is going to be something we can also destructure from the use chat hook that we get from the Vercel AI SDK. And just like that, bam, we're pretty much good to go. So let's try this. Who was, and what was his name again? Tom Hartley. Tom Hartley. Let's hit enter. That's going to send our message. Beautiful. And then the AI streams in the response as it's generated by their GPUs. Hell yeah, dude. That is absolutely awesome. We can now chat to this website. And now all that's left to do is some improvements. So for example, with the session, right? Right now we're just mocking the session in our page right here. So in our URL page, we're just kind of mocking the session, which is not ideal, because if you and I are on the same website, we would have the same chat, we would share the same session, which is not good, right? So I want to show you how to properly do this, and that is in our source directory in a new file. Let's call this middleware.ts, and it's important that it's named this way. Next.js expects you to name it middleware in order to work properly. And in here, we can export a function called middleware, which takes a rec, which is a next request right here. And this just allows us to execute some logic before the user accesses the page. And that logic will be pretty straightforward. We're going to say const res is going to be equal to a next response dot next. So this would let us forward the request. So if we call this, then we're letting the request pass, right? So conceptually how this works, I want you to understand how this looks like. Basically, there's the user. They want to go to our page, right, to ask a question to the website page. But before that happens, the middleware right here intercepts, right? There's the middleware checking some stuff, some logic before the user is led through to the page. And once we call this right here, the next response to next, essentially what we're saying in the middleware is this request is okay. We're not blocking the user from accessing the page, and bam, the user can now access the page. If we like redirect the user, for example, then their request would not actually go through to the page, but they would fail at the middleware and be redirected somewhere else. That's what middleware is awesome for. And what we're going to do in here is check the user cookie. So we're going to say const cookie is equal to a rec.cookies.get session ID. That's what we're going to name it, because that's how we're going to keep track of sessions. And if the user does not have a session cookie, if there is no cookie, then we're going to create one. We're going to say res.cookies.set session ID, and we're going to say crypto.random UUID. Perfect. So we're just going to create a session cookie for them and then return the response. That's it. Now we could implement like a matcher, like when this middleware runs and so on. We're not going to worry about that for now. We're just going to save this middleware and you're going to see what happens. Once we now navigate to our page and reload, go into our dev tools under application, we're going to see that we now have a session cookie, and I'm going to delete all cookies, reload the page, and maybe I can give this a bit more space. There we go. We now have a session ID that does not change when we reload our page. It stays the same, right? So we can identify one user and make sure that each user on our website has a separate session for them, so they don't all talk to the same website. So when I send a message, it's not going to be in your chat, right? That would be absolutely horrible, and that's what we want to prevent. And now to simply retrieve that session ID in our page is really, really easy. We can simply use the cookies helper from Next.js. It's the cookies from next/headers that we can import .get, and we're going to get the session ID, which is optional. It doesn't have to exist, .value. But the thing is, a chat should not only be unique to a user, but also to the website they are talking to, right? Because otherwise, all the websites they're talking to would be in the same chat. That is also not what we want. So what we need to do is to construct the session ID based on the current URL, which is one website, and the user, right? Not either or. So let's, instead of session ID, call this the session cookie. Let's move it up by holding Alt and pressing the arrow up and down. That's how I did that. And then let's construct the actual session ID out of the session cookie and the actual URL that the user is talking to. So let's say const session ID is going to be equal to, and then in parentheses, the reconstructed URL plus dash dash as just a string. This is just how we separate the URL from the session cookie, right? You can do anything here. It doesn't really matter. This is just a convention that I like to follow. And then append the session cookie. So one session is always unique to one website and one user, right? That's all we're saying here. And we're going to replace all these slashes in there with an empty string so we don't get any URL problems. So what we're going to do here is a double slash. We're going to construct a regular expression, backslash, and then a slash right here. And we want to replace them globally with an empty string. So all we're doing is replacing the slashes with an empty string. That's literally it, right? And that's how we construct the session ID, which is now always a string unique to one user and the website they are chatting to. So we never get any kind of wrong logic, no overlaps between users or websites. And once we save that, beautiful, and restart our page, we can now ask any question. Who was this guy called Tom? Hit enter, and that's gonna answer our question. A cricketer and another a politician. Was he both? I don't even know. Anyways, we can now chat with the website. Beautiful. And now the last thing we want to fix is when we reload this page, the messages are gone. And we want to persist them in our database, right? And that's super, super easy. All we need to do is to go into our React chat and as the Redis, pass our Redis instance that we created. And that's it, right? Just as easy as that. We can now persist our messages in our database. And we can also grab the initial messages, const initial messages in our main page right here. So in the URL page.tsx, that is where we are. There we go. We can fetch the initial messages and put them in the chat, right? So they're already there once we reload. And that's going to be await React chat. And there's a method on here that allows us to grab our message history. So once we import React chat, I believe we already did. Yes, we did. Beautiful. We can say dot history, there we go, dot get messages. Oh, sorry, little cut there, but now I'm back. Anyways, so we can grab the initial messages just like this with await reactchat.history.getMessages. Perfect. We can also specify the amount. Let's say we want to get the last 10 messages. And if you wanted to implement infinite scrolling or pagination, you can definitely do that. That's why we have the start index right here. We're going to skip that for this video, but we are going to put in the session ID to make sure we only grab the messages for this website for this user, right? So even if you and I chat to the same site, I sound like a broken record at this point probably, you are gonna get your messages and I'm gonna get my messages. And now the only thing that's left to do is to pass these messages as a prop into our chat wrapper. Hell yeah. So let's go into our chat wrapper. Let's receive the initial messages right here. And let's also type them to let TypeScript know what the hell is going on. And these are going to be of type message array. And now message is a type that we can grab from AI/React from the Vercel AI SDK. Beautiful. And we can simply put in the initial messages right here. Save that, see what happens. And oh, of course, we need to restart our development server. If that's not running, maybe for you it is already running. And then let's reload our page and see what happens. So what we expect happens now is, there we go. Our messages are there. They're drawn from our database. By the way, if you're curious where we are storing them, they are automatically stored in Redis right here. So for this URL, for this user right here, if we copy that, we can see the full thing. It's the URL. It's probably a bit small for you. And then the user session ID. There are all the messages in here. They're super fast in a Redis store and loaded once we reload this page. Awesome, thank you. There we go, hit enter. The AI is gonna stream in the response, beautiful. And once we reload the page, it's loaded almost immediately, super, super fast from our upstash Redis data store. Beautiful, and that works for any website. Let's go to, I don't know, another Wikipedia random. Wikipedia random. There we go. Let's go here. And no, that's a bit short. We want a longer website. We want some load on our vector database. What is that? North? Nah, I don't care about this football team. Let's go one more. I don't know what this is. Anyways, let's go with this. It's, I don't know. We can just ask the AI what the hell this is. So let's append localhost 3000. Not append, prepend, hit enter. And once that's done, let's ask a question. So let's kind of open this side by side. Move this in here. There we go. And now we can ask questions to this Wikipedia page. Let's zoom in a bit so it's easier for you to see. Let's say, what is, and then just kind of copy and paste this in because I have actually no idea what this is. Let's hit enter. Based on the provided context, it refers to a music publisher established in 1922 by Milton. Ah, okay, so it's like their last names. I see. Okay, Ben, is that true? Ben Born. Aha, there it says. Yeah, perfect. Oh, okay. Dude, that's awesome. Very, very nice. Notable song. Okay, what are notable songs? And let's hit enter. Based on the song's notable songs published, but ain't she sweet? Is that true? Yeah, there it is. Happy Days Are Here Again. That's another song they apparently made. Dude, that's awesome. It works really well. If we reload this page, bam, the chat history is there. We're automatically focused on the input. Very, very nice. Dude, I really hope you enjoyed following along. I hope you learned a lot. Not just how to do the AI stuff, but also how to do good code, right? How to write really nice code. Because I don't think implementing a RAG chat, a chat with actual information, gets much easier than we currently have. I really hope you enjoyed following along, and I'm gonna do the outro in person. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. This is finally a time I didn't forget to do the outro in person. So I hope you agree. I kept my promise that you learned a lot in this video. I had a ton of fun making it, and I hope you learned what are like dynamic routes, how to do all this AI stuff in Next.js, because turns out it's not very difficult if you have pretty good packages like the one we just released to do it. So dude, I really hope you enjoyed following along. I hope you learned a lot. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch the video. And then I'm gonna see you in the next one. Until then, have a good one and bye bye.